today we are going to talk about the overview of cerebellum. Cerebellum is the next posterior part to the cerebrum, and it is basically important for the coordinations, and some special part we are going to deal here will be about the location. So let us see some different views which can be observed. Like this is posterior view. You can see something like butterfly. These can be wings. This can be the middle part, vermis. Then you can see the anterior view. On the anterior side, you can see the peduncles. Inferior side from the lower, and this will be the superior. You can see this is highly lobulated, curved or lobulated, or having many numbers of sulci, gyri, which are present in this particular part. Then we have to talk about the location. The cerebellum is located in the posterior cranial fossa underneath the tentorium cerebelli. You see the color marking here. This is tentorium cerebelli, and this part is cerebellum. Embryologically related to pons and connected to the brain stem through the three cerebral peduncles. We have seen these peduncles in anterior view. So basically, this is connected with the cerebral peduncles. In yellow, you can see the pons. The fourth ventricle is located between the pons and cerebellum. This blue color thing which you can see here, it is the fourth ventricle which is in between the pons and cerebrum. Now moving further, we can see that two views again, anterior view and superior view. So we can see some parts of the cerebellum. So here you can see the flocus, nodule, paravermis, vermis, the middle part, cerebral tonsils on the lower part, and cerebral peduncles. These are the cerebral peduncles. Again, we can see all the parts one by one. So first you can see the follicus, nodule, paravermis, vermis, cerebral tonsils, and cerebral peduncles. So some of the parts, like you can see the vermis and paravermis, they are more visible, properly visible from the superior side, and most of them are visible from the anterior side. Next, we can see the lobes. How many lobes it has? It has actually 3 lobes. Anterior lobe, posterior lobe, and foculonodular node. Again, you can see one by one. First of all, foculonodular node, which is the middle part, small part, was actually the part where we have seen the flocus and nodule. Then the posterior part, which is the most part, and anterior lobe, which is present on the anterior and superior side, anterosuperior side. Next, we have to see some functional areas related with the, these are the functional areas, like 3 parts, the spinocerebrum, cerebrocerebellum, and vestibulocerebrum. The first spinocerebrum part, you can see it is mostly the anterior part and the vermis and parafollicular parts, the anterior lobe, vermis, and paravermis. Then cerebral part, mostly all of the posterior lobe, and vestibulocerebellar part, it will be basically the follicus and nodules. The folliculonodular part, the lobe which we have seen, the third lobe, it will be basically for vestibulocerebellar function. Cerebrocerebellar function will be in the posterior part. Then spinocerebellar function will be in the anterior lobe and vermis or paravermis part. Next, we have to see the cerebral peduncles. So there are 3 cerebral peduncles, as we have already talked, which can be easily visible from the anterior side. The superior part, superior cerebral peduncle, middle cerebral peduncle, and inferior cerebral peduncle. So you can see the blue one, that is inferior cerebral peduncle. The middle cerebral peduncle is the red one, and the superior cerebral peduncle is the green one. These are the 3 peduncles, means attachments, where it is going to attach the rest of the CNS or part. Now we have to see the cross section through the rostral, medulla, and cerebrum. So again, you can see the globose nucleus, vermis, this was the vermis, amniform nucleus, vestigial nucleus, superior cerebral peduncle, inferior cerebral nucleus, and dentate nucleus. Dentate nucleus is the main output nucleus from the cerebrum. You can see the dentate nucleus again, this part, which is illuminating now, yellow, curvy part. This is dentate nucleus. It seems to be like dentate or teeth arrangement. That's why it's called dentate. The main output for nucleus from the cerebrum. This is the main output. Next, we have to see the contents of cerebral peduncles. So superior cerebral peduncles, afferent part, it will be the anterior cerebral tract. Acoustic and optic information will be coming through these afferents. While efferent side, you can see the dentochlorubothalamic tract or dentochlorothalamic tract. These will be the efferent for the superior part. In the middle part, there is only afferents, pontocerebral tract, and in the inferior part, you can see the vestibulocerebral tract, olivocerebral tract, and posterior spinocerebral tract as afferents. And as efferents, you can see the cerebrovestibular tract, cerebroolivary tract. These will be the contents of cerebral peduncles. Means what is the information which is passing either up to down or downward. Next, we have to see about the blood supply or some loops. That is, there are three functional loops are here that we have already named them. Vestibulocerebral loop. It helps in the coordination of balance, vestibulo-ocular reflex, output to lower motor neurons for trunk and limb stability. So this is actually for the balance. Then spinocerebral, it is for coordination and correction of trunk and limb movement. Is how we are walking, how coordinated we are walking. It will be from the spinocerebral part. Then cerebrocerebral part, it is for the streamlining of cortical output. Whatever cortical output is there, it will be streamlined by a cerebrocerebral loop. So there are three loops: vestibulo, simply you can understand for balance, spinocerebral for coordination, and cerebrocerebral for streamlining of cortical output. Then one by one we have to see. Now vestibulocerebral connections, you can see they are coming from the follicular part of the cerebrum. So projection from cerebrum back to vestibular nuclei and to the reticular pathway. Projections from the vestibular nuclei to vestibulocerebrum, that is folliculonautical lobe plus paravermis. So you can see there are three parts: vestibular nuclei, reticular formation, and again vestibular nuclei. The output via vestigial nucleus. So vestibular nuclei, reticular formation, and vestibular nuclei, again they will give some instruction to the spinal cord. Projections from vestibular nuclei and reticular formation to spinal cord for trunk stability and influence of anti-gravity muscle. Remember, these formations, that is vestibular nuclear and reticular formation, will act on spinal cord and give that information that how to stabilize the trunk and influence the anti-gravity muscles. So this will be the part of vestibulocerebral part. Next will be spinocerebral. Spinocerebral, as you can recall, this was basically forward. As you can see, it will be coordinated for the motor cerebral cortex via spinal cord. Then there will be red nucleus, again the vestibular nuclei, reticular formation. So these projections back to the spinal cord are responsible for the stability of the trunk. Trunk will be stable by this, and projections back to the limbs are processed through the cortex. Afferents from spinal cord reach the spinocerebrum, which will be the part vermis and paravermis. And from it can be directly also given to the spinal cord. So this is spinocerebral for stability of trunk. Next will be the last loop, that is cerebrocerebral connections. So here the cortex, spinal. Then what will happen? Now this part will be for the coordination between the streamlining of cortex. So thalamus feedback to the cortex. Then it will give the inputs from the cortex to the cerebrum is relayed through the pontine nuclei. You can see here pontine nuclei. From there, the fibers cross the midline and enters the posterior lobe to the middle cerebral peduncle. You can cross check going back this information that from these fibers crosses the nuclei, crosses the midline. First of all, this crosses the midline and enter the posterior lobe through the middle cerebral peduncle. This is the role of pontine nuclei. Then what is from the dentate nucleus, whatever information was there, it will go to the red nucleus, to the thalamus, and feedback will be given to the cortex. Output is through the dentorubothalamic tract in the superior cerebral peduncle. So this type of loop will be via superior cerebral peduncle, and any influence back to lower motor neuron in the spinal cord will be via corticospinal tract. So tracts, we have already uploaded previous videos of how to understand the tracts. So corticospinal will be a descending type of tract. Next, we have to see the blood supply. So the vessels which supply the vertebral vessel system, that is posterior part of brain, will also supply the. So first of all, it is AICA arteries, then posterior arteries, Then superior cerebral arteries. You can see the part. Most part is given by the superior cerebral arteries. Posterior one gives the posterior part specifically. You can see this part. And anterior one will give to the anterior part and little bit part from the superior side also. So it can be summarized by a table. You can see AICA means anterior inferior cerebral artery. It supplies the cerebral peduncles, follicles, nodules, lateral aspect of the posterior lobe, and assist with the supply to the deep cerebral nuclei. What nuclei, dentate nuclei, pontine nuclei, whatever nuclei we have seen. Posterior inferior cerebral artery, its speaker, it supplies with the posterior lobe mainly, inferior surface, extending onto the superior surface, tonsils and inferior parts of vermis also. Then there is SCA, that is superior cerebral arteries. They supply anterior lobe, posterior lobe on the superior aspect, vermis on superior aspect, major supply to the deep cerebral nuclei, and can also provide supply to the SCPs and rostral part of MCP. So this was the all about the cerebrum in a very short and summarized manner. Thank you.